Yeah, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, and I'm really, really excited to talk to you today, both because I'm trying new technology, which is fun, and
Super fun.
also because you're one of my favorite people, and I look up to you, and you're some of my inspiration. So,
Oh, you're so sweet, Elizabeth.
thank you. So, tell my audience a little bit about who you are, how I know you, and what you're doing right now.
Well, we know each other through a mastermind, which is fantastic. And I love the ability to meet people from all over the place when we do masterminds. I am Cecilia Mannella and I live in Canada. So I'm on the west coast of Canada. And I'm a registered social worker and clinical counselor. I've been working in the mental health field for probably 24 years, which makes me sound really old. Just so I like when I used to say 18 years or 16 years, I'm like, I still feel kind of young. But now, it's been like 24 years. I have my own group practice. I supervise, I teach, I do all the things, and really passionate about talking about mental health with you.
Great. There's two big reasons I started this YouTube channel. The first was we talk about the one-on-one all the time, and we
Right.
don't get a chance to kind of talk about the bigger world. And so I like starting with some bigger questions that we all have
Love
thoughts
it.
about, right?
Love it.
And the second is, at least where I am, I don't know what you've seen in your practice, but I see a bigger and bigger divide between people who have the resources and people who don't, but also
Hmm.
between people who can get a lot out of therapy and maybe people who don't need therapy.
Right.
I don't hesitate, but like therapy isn't for everybody, and that's perfectly okay. And so part of this channel is just talking about like what are resources that anybody could use. Like you don't have to go to therapy to have them,
Right.
right? So we're going to talk about both today
Great.
and see how that looks, like for the people in general and the world. So
Love
I
it.
like to start these interviews with just a big question
Okay.
of what do you think about the state of the mental health field and mental health in general in the world today?
Oh my gosh, that's such a big question.
I
What do I
know.
think about the state of mental health field? Oh, so I think maybe because I've been in it for so long, I've been able to see. I got like 2 decades. So I
Hmm.
at this point, I think in my career, I can actually do comparisons, right, in a sense of how it used to be and how it is today. And what I see, I mean, there's things happening side by side that are like I would say pros and cons, right? The pros have been the advent of social media has brought a lot of education, it has brought a lot of information. It makes stuff more accessible because when I think 20 years ago that so much of the information around mental health and research and books were kind of kept behind a glass door. So you
Yeah.
had to be really educated to have access to this place. So you needed your degree, you needed your license, and all these things to get in there to have the information, and then you kind of disseminate it through your practice. Whereas now, because of like such ease of finding information, it makes it a lot easier for people to access information. But the flip side of that is that there's missing context. So there are a lot of terms that get thrown out there. There's a lot of information out there that's not actually accurate or it's taken out of context without the research and for people to understand like where this information actually comes from.
Yeah.
So I find it a challenge that people are using terminology or saying things and let's say like reprocessing, regurgitating information that's actually not accurate, that isn't really helpful to people. So that is a massive con that I see happening in the field, but across the world in general. I think that it's been great that there's been a lot more education about mental health, but I also think that mental health is like physical health. And we talk about it like this idea of not everyone needs therapy is really important because there's ways to improve your mental health without it have to be being so traumatizing, if that makes sense. Like
Yes.
it doesn't always have to be rooted in trauma. And sometimes I think there's this idea of making problems bigger in order to have people understand you, which has been a massive shift I've seen in the last 20 years for sure. And I think it's the other thing is I think mental health is just all over the place. Like training 20 years ago is very different than training today.
Yes.
And we're pumping out, I'm not sure what's happening in the States and other countries, but I know for sure that here in Canada, there's been a lot more schools that have opened up like masters of counseling program, and there's a lot of private universities now. Whereas in Canada, there used to be the private universities used to be really, there would be a few of them in the entire nation, but now there's so many of them. So they accept more people, which means they're pumping out more people. And I think it's diluted the level of training and expertise. And I think that's a little bit problematic for us. I mean, I could go on and on, but those are my initial thoughts.
Hearing you talk, it brought up some information I've been reading. I've been out of schools for about 3 years now as a counselor.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's been decades since I've been out of schools as a student. And I read a recent report about resilience on university campuses and in high school. And it's this kind of duality I think you're talking about a little bit, in the sense of, on one hand, we want to make sure people understand that you don't have to be okay. It's okay to have a bad thing happen to you. Let's talk about that. And yeah, taking in your identity and being
Sure.
conscious of that and all that that entails. Because there is a lot of value in understanding what has nothing to do with you, what is just a
Right.
messed up system affecting you. And we're losing some resiliency because we're diluting what is trauma, what is mental health, what does that look like, right? You know, I see it all the time in the sense that everybody has anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Having anxiety is not a bad thing. It keeps you alive. It's important. It helps you plan for the future.
It's normal.
And yet
Actually, you're,
it's
if you don't experience anxiety at all your entire lifetime, like something's broken. Like anxiety is a survival mechanism. We need it.
exactly. And people forget that. They want to just never
Mm-hmm.
have anxiety. They're like, oh, normal people have no anxiety. And I'm like,
Right.
no, if you have no
No.
anxiety, you're that is in itself a mental illness. Like you need
Right.
a certain level of anxiety. And so to your point about what you're seeing across the board, how pervasive mental health has gotten, on one hand it's beautiful and wonderful. And I love all the books out there. I love how people will come in and be like, hey, I read about this attachment theory thing. I read about
Yeah.
being the child of narcissistic parents,
Yeah.
and I'm like,
Love
oh,
that.
awesome, love it. Please bring that in. Let's talk about it. We can have a
Right.
whole different level of conversation here
Right.
than if you didn't have that knowledge. And, sometimes you're just fine. Like, that's just life,
Yeah.
and you're okay. And I think we're missing kind of, I think we've
Yeah.
swung a little far. So I agree with you.
I I think we've swung a little far in the developing world. Like it's also like there, therapy isn't so popular in second or third world countries because they have other things to be worried about, right? They
Yeah.
have like food and shelter and water and economics and those things to worry about. And there's much more resiliency. And the question is like, why are some third world countries that have less access to resources, less economic security, have less, are actually doing better when it comes to mental health? And so it's a question to ask. We are the most medicated, unwell population and like generation ever. Why? We have the most access to resources, to security. We've been the most secure ever in the Western world, and yet we're not well. So it's like, what's happening here, right? And I think like when I think about an example is, yes, we all have anxiety, and I think that I'm a Gen Xer. I'm 46. So although my parents were lovely and supportive and everything, there was a push. I don't want to do that. Well, you're going to do it anyways. Oh, I feel nervous about public speaking in high school. I've got this speech to do and I don't think I'm going to do well. It's like, okay, it's okay. Let's practice. Let's do something because you have to do it anyways. Whereas I think now it's like you have a teenager who says, I don't want to do this speak. I don't want to public speak at school, my English class, because I have anxiety. And the parent is writing a note to excuse their child from doing this activity because some anxiety is present. So now we're actually creating something. So in therapy, what I see is young adults that come in and be like, I have so much social anxiety, so much this, I can't do this, I can't do that, because no one's ever pushed them to do it. Because I think that we have access to so much information, which is great to, let's say, anxiety, but we're missing the context. So then people are parenting or showing up in their lives and saying, well, this is present and that's a mental illness. I have anxiety of a mental illness. No, you don't. We've watered down mental illness so much that it's like everybody has it. So everyone's getting medicated and everyone's being absolved from doing the things that humans have to do, which is we need to do things that are uncomfortable because that's
Yeah.
just the way it is. Whereas in third world countries, they do uncomfortable shit all the time. They have to. They have to. There's no other option. If I want food and water, I'm going to have to walk, 10 kilometers to get there. But now if I have social anxiety, I just don't get to go outside. I get to stay inside and like scroll on social, play video games, watch TV, and everything's going to be comfortable for me. So comfort does not equal resilience. And I think we forget that. It's that in discomfort, we actually build resilience. We actually exercise that muscle that makes us more able to handle more stress, because that's what we're supposed to be doing throughout our life, is do more uncomfortable things so we have more resilience. So as adults in the world, we can actually handle more complex things, because things get more complicated as you get older. They don't get easier, they just get harder.
Part of what I see limiting the resilience of myself, of every, like, I'm not outside the world, I'm in there
Right.
myself. And I don't know that I would have put my finger on this before the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
but I kind of give it to you. Put it on comfort. I think there's some truth in that, right? When I was treating homeless people, yeah, they did hard shit all the time because they got to survive.
And
They got to
incredible
focus on
resilience. Like I've
exactly,
done worked with people who are street entrenched or in addiction, or super abusive situations that they're coming out of, and the resilience is amazing. It's shocking that people survive living on the streets
exactly, and they find a way, right? That's the point.
all
They
the time.
find a way.
Mm-hmm.
I actually put it on two different things though. So the first one is, and it came from the pandemic, was isolation. And I would include social media as isolating, right?
A hundred
Because
percent.
you're not looking somebody in the eye. You're not
Yeah.
seeing the direct impact, right? And you and I know about mirror neurons and how empathy
Yes.
works. And you see somebody in pain on a screen, it does not fire the
Mm.
same way it does looking in somebody's eye and seeing their pain because you said something mean to them,
Right.
right? And we talk about that all the time, about the difference between trolls and basements versus like in person, but that empathy is from the mirror neurons, and it does fire when you literally are across from them
Yeah.
in a way it doesn't on a screen. And I think people are more and more isolated all the time, and that reduces your resilience because you're going to make an effort, whether it's ego, I'm not going to let them see me fail, or it's, embarrassment, I don't want to show that I have nerves, or empathy, like, hey,
Right.
I promised this person I would do this, I want to live up to it. All those things get you to do the hard thing, get you to overcome that anxiety or that sadness, or just be a little bit nicer. Whereas that isolation, you don't have to. Even though you're like comparing yourself on social media, you can check out of that whenever you want. You
Well,
can't
connection
do that in person.
connection is motivation. I think we
Yes.
forget that. Like, we're meant to live in tribes. We're not meant to live in the way they were living. And we forget that and we look at thousands of years of human history. It's like we've always lived in small communities and in connection. And connection is motivation.
Yeah.
And
See,
when we're
you
more
talked about
disconnected,
Africa.
yeah,
Yeah, you talked about Africa, right? Like you're going to walk that 10 miles to get that
right.
water because your kids need it, because your husband
Hun-
needs it, because your
your
tribe needs
brother,
it.
your sister needs it, your grandma needs it, your neighbor needs it. Someone just had a
Yes.
baby and they need it. Connection is motivation. Connection brings value in so many ways. You do the things that you sometimes don't want to do or that feel hard because of your connection and love for another human.
Yes.
Essentially, that's what parenting is, right? If you
Yes.
didn't feel connection or love for your child, we wouldn't have babies. That's just the reality of things. So, connection is the source of motivation, and isolation then removes that motivation to do those uncomfortable things.
Yeah. The other place, and this one is very, I don't want to call it controversial, but it is very nuanced and complicated.
Love it. Tell me.
Okay. We're so busy trying to be nice and safe that we're not willing to have any sort of confrontation or uncomfortableness, right? I see this, and I think it's a reaction, and I think there's some value in it. That's why I think it's complicated and nuanced, right? I think about the whole Karen debate, right? Yeah, we shouldn't be condescending and rude and
Mm-hmm.
inappropriate to people, 100%. And I don't care who you are. And I feel bad for people named Karen, and I feel bad for people who were standing up for themselves and trying to find assertiveness, right? Like we've really confused assertiveness and aggressiveness.
100%.
And I think it's particularly complicated for women, right? Because if we're assertive at all, whoa, you're aggro. Oh, whoa, like you're being like we've got another label to say your assertiveness is not good for the world.
Right.
And that's where it gets complicated, right? Because that caring conversation is really important. There was people, there are people, we all have moments where we access a Karen and we show up in a way that's not good for the world, that it's not assertiveness, it's aggressiveness. And now people are scared to be assertive, or at least people I witness around me are really scared to like just stand up for themselves, just be real, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of it's so layered because it's like what comes to mind are two different things. It's like one, we don't know how to have conflict that breeds more connection. We automatically
Yes.
think conflict means divisiveness. We have a bit of a
Yes.
problem in that in culture, and that's probably nuance and like how where that is comes from and how it's kind of become what it is. And I know you're in the States, so it's a little bit different. Like you guys are much more divisive than we are here in Canada. But we're kind of also mimicking that quite a bit. We can't help it. We're neighbors. Like we just do what the neighbors do, right? So whereas, like my parents will tell me because they're, boomer generation, and they'd be like, we used to have the ability to have conflict or debates with friends about politics or religion or these kind of heavy topics like world topics and world news. And we could debate it, but it never really meant we didn't respect each other. We would still be
That's
friends and
it.
we still have this relationship with each other. We would just have a great heated debate and then hug it out and be like, but we're still friends, we still have this relationship, we're still connected. But now is this idea of like, if you don't believe what I believe, then you can't be in my life. And so we don't know how to conflict anymore. I see this in relationships, I see this in family relationships, I see this in marriages, kids and their parents, or young adults and their extended family, like I'm cutting my grandma off because blah blah blah. It's like, is there any idea or concept to know that your grandma grew up in a whole different generation? Where's the grace? Where's the love? Where's the, working within those boundaries in the way you show up in that relationship to maintain those connections? We imagine now like boundaries are cutting people off and they're a wall. And the truth are, boundaries is about expressing my love for myself and my love for you to figure out a way to have a relationship in a way that honors both our needs. And we don't do that anymore. We're so quick to, oh, my neighbor is, has a different political ideology than me, then I want nothing to do with them. They're this, they're this, they're this, they're this. And we start labeling people and we want nothing to do with them. And so that leads to so much isolation because we don't know how to have conflict anymore that creates connection. Instead, we see it as here's a line in the sand. And if you're not on my side, then you're my enemy. And COVID really accentuated this. Like it, the media accentuated this language was put out there by the media on purpose. If anyone thinks that, oh, it's just the way it is, no, this is all done with purpose to create this divisiveness. It's a setup to create more isolation. We buy more shit when we're isolated. When we feel awful, we buy more into the capitalism of things. And that's what comes to mind when you were talking about the Karen thing. But the other thing about the Karen thing is like what we're not talking about is privilege. And Karen has always been, when you say Karen, what is the vision that everyone thinks about is a white woman, right? White woman over 40, probably in her 50s, being really entitled. And it's like, can we just have a conversation about entitlement or race or privilege instead of labeling it as Karen? Because now we're making it a woman issue instead of making it an actual like everybody issue. Because it doesn't mean that men don't do this. We just don't have a name for it. We're not calling someone a Kevin or whatever it is that we use because there's no term for it for men who act this way. But there's a term for it for women act this way.
Well, I think you put your finger on what I was kind of floating around, right? Which is this idea of loss of respect and how that
Mhm.
reduces the ability to have a disagreement or a conflict or a conversation. And if we label somebody a Karen, we've already disrespected them.
100,
Now,
and we're not
their
listening to
behavior,
anything.
yes, and their behavior might be so
Sure.
entitled and
Yeah.
awful that we want to disrespect them, but that's not going to help us resolve that conflict. That's not going to
No.
change anything in society by disrespecting them.
No.
And I see that this is interesting where my previous career really helps out because I was in middle management for a very long
Right.
time in a bunch of tech companies, so surrounded by tech pros. And disrespect is rampant and it creates fear. It creates a lack of willingness to speak up. It creates a place where you're not willing to have a disagreement because you're always going to lose.
Well, it's
And
silencing,
so,
right? Yeah.
right? So you just check out of the conversation. You stop having conversations. You stop building a team. And I really, everybody I look at around me who I really respect in terms of leadership, in terms of being in the community, in terms of building community, they really try to find something they can respect about another person. They don't just slap a label and move on. They might really hate talking to this person. This person may be a pain in the ass and a
Right.
jerk to them, and they might severely disagree with them. And they still take the time to try to find a way to respect that person because it builds their compassion, their resiliency, and their willingness to engage with this person.
Right.
It keeps them coming back and connected. And so talking about tools or resources that people can use to start to change the world, right? Because I don't want to just talk about how it's broken
How
and
awful
crazy.
things
That
are. It's like turns
yeah,
into a complaining session.
exactly. Um, to me, one of the biggest things people
Mm.
can do to start accessing a different way of interacting with the world and making things better is take some time every day to find something you can respect about the people who are driving you crazy, who you don't respect, who you don't like. Look for those places. That would be my resource is just look for places you
Mm.
can find respect, even if it's somebody you violently disagree with. How about
Yeah.
yourself? What's a resource you would give people struggling with
I
this?
go to curiosity. I think we're missing curiosity. I think that we make a ton of assumptions and everyone doesn't have time, and curiosity takes a little bit of time.
It does.
And I think it's like if we could get back into being curious, I think respect automatically kind of like bubbles to the surface. There's a bit of more appreciation. So when I'm getting frustrated with my mom, let's say, and went through, I think like the mother daughter relationship is probably one of the most complicated relationships on the planet. And, but if I go to a place of curiosity and ask myself in questions, remind myself, like, how did she grow up? What do I know to be true? I imagine what it would be like to be a young mom in the 70s, you know, and then I just can go to compassion really quickly,
Hmm.
right? When I imagine being curious about what people's experiences are, it's easy for me to go to curiosity. And I identify as a strong feminist. I'm very feminist lefty in many ways. And I have people in counseling that I'd say stereotypical men who are rooted in sexism and patriarchy and say awful things and it can be abusive and I work with those people and people will ask me, well, how do you do that? It's because I'm radically curious. I don't go in I want to know why. I want to know how they've come to this place. How did somebody go from being this beautiful perfect baby that enters the world and then turn into somebody who hates other people? Like, I'm just really curious how that happened. I don't want to judge them for how they are. I'm more curious about how they came to be who they are because that helps me understand them. Because I don't really believe people want to show up in the world and be assholes. I just don't. Nobody says today's the day, I'm going to choose this career or, just show up in this way. People show up. I'm curious about it. And when you can get really curious, and I mean like radical curiosity around letting go of preconceived notions of what you already know about this person, but just to be curious, you're actually going to learn a lot. Even with someone who has a complete opposite view of you, like political view. I'm curious about why people are so conservative. I want to know. I want to know someone who has complete opposing views of me. I want to understand why they believe that. Not to judge them, but I'm just really curious. And then we can have a really open conversation because if I show up with curiosity, what naturally happens is the other person becomes curious about me.
Yes.
And we if we can get to that place, it's great. It's amazing. We don't have to believe the same things. We don't have to live the same life. We don't have to show up in the same way. But if I can be really curious about who you are as a human, then that becomes so much easier. And I really want people to be more curious. And you don't need it. You don't need to go to therapy for that. It's not going to cost you anything. It's really cheap. It's really free. Actually, curiosity is free. So that would be my greatest resource is curiosity.
So you said it's free. I would argue it's not, because
Okay.
I think the number one thing you need to be curious, and it's what I love about being a therapist, is I think you need time. It's not quick.
Hmm.
You're not going to get the quick answer, right? Like we make assumptions because we got things to do, we got places to go. I already know what you're going to say. I can't. I don't have time for this. I got to go to the grocery store. I got to go do this. And part of what therapy allows is we give you a whole hour to be curious about yourself, for me to be curious about you, that conversation. So I think about the mother daughter conversation. It's always quick. We got this
Mm-hmm.
to do, we got this to do, we got this to do. And that grandmother you want to cut out because she said the racist comment, or the girlfriend or boyfriend you don't want to talk to anymore because they said this, to be curious about them, which is 100% what I think you need to be respectful, to do all that, requires you to slow down, requires you to have the time to have that conversation. I think about meetings in all those companies. Part of what allows you to build respect is to be curious about what is happening in these people's lives. Why were they late giving me that piece of information?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's because their kid was sick this morning and they've been dealing with throw up on their house as they've been trying to do it.
Right.
So they were like 10 minutes late. Well, the only reason I have that information is because I slowed down the status meeting from a quick 15-minute update to a 45-minute, how's everybody doing today? What's been going on in your life today? Where is everybody's energies levels that they can bring to the office today? And now I have that information. I can respect why people are showing up the way they do. But I just took a 15-minute meeting and made it a 45, 60-minute meeting.
Sure.
That takes time. And I think that's really important for all those people out there who might listen to this and be like, well, sure, great, I should be curious, but when am I supposed to do this? Well, you got to slow down. You got to cut some things out. You got to say, I can't do everything. Let me really focus on what's important and give myself space and time to be genuinely curious.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would help everybody a little bit, is just to let go of this idea of I have to do everything.
I think it's such a good thing about time. I mean, we all get the same amount of time in a day. No one gets an extra hour. We all get the same amount, and it's our greatest resource. We've just been socialized to believe that we need to exchange time for money. So when I say free, I mean it doesn't cost you any money.
That's
It's
true.
you're allocating your greatest resource in exchange for a dollar. Okay, so that's the culture we live in, and it's my labor, my time is in exchange for a monetary value. We are wasting so much of our greatest resource with things like social media, sitting on our phones, watching TV, like all these things that actually are commuting, driving. There's all these things that are taking our resource. And we don't often stop to question or take an inventory of how we're allocating our greatest resource. Our greatest resource isn't how much money you have in the bank, it's actually the time, because you never get it back. You can never make more time. You can never get more time. It is what it is. It is your greatest resource. And we're peddling it like it's worth nothing. Right. And if someone puts down their phone, and I challenge people all the time and say, take the apps off your phone, take all the social media apps off, anything that's distracting, games, social media, whatever it is, unless it's like email, calling, which no one does anymore, and good old texting, everything else, take it off your phone for 30 days. And I can guarantee you're going to have so much time, you're not going to know what to do with yourself.
So I have two different challenges. They're similar in nature, but they're slightly different, because there's no way I could talk a tech person in Silicon Valley into taking off all their apps. What I challenge them to do is, one, take every app except four. You get to pick four, and your
Right.
phone counts as an app.
Right.
Right? They can't be on your home screen, so you only get four apps on your home screen. Everything else has to be over there, and turn off every single notification. You don't get a
Right.
single notification.
You could access your app, but on a computer. I just mean take it off your phone, take it off in your pocket. Don't
Yeah,
carry it with you wherever you go so that you're constantly on it, because the pulling of it is like an addiction. It's a habit. It's
yeah,
like you're just in it. It's no different than grabbing a cigarette all the time that you just want a cigarette. That's become the new thing. So if you remove it and remind yourself that your time is actually your biggest allocation, your big greatest resource, you actually might be more intentional if you put them back on.
That's right.
And it's not fun to scroll Facebook on a computer, let me tell you, or scroll like Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is that you're using to check out or to relax or to disengage from work. All those things are not fun on a computer. You're going to find you're going to be on it for a few minutes and go, this isn't fun, because they've
Yes.
gamified it, because they've hacked our brain, because our brain loves these things. So like you can gain all this time back. You can gain space for reflection and thinking. It's like we don't have time for that anymore. Well, do we not have time, or just have we packed our time with useless shit? Like the greatest thinkers of history, the greatest inventions, and the stories that are told is, I was just sitting there wondering, and an apple hit my head, and I thought, well, how does that happen? And here's the advent of gravity. It's like all these things in history have come from places of boredom or of reflection. Not that long ago, philosophers would, like, they just had a life of thinking. They didn't have to work. They were supported by the monarchy to think about the world. We don't have that anymore. You can barely figure out what you're going to have for what you're going to make for breakfast. Never mind think about, who am I as a human on this planet, and who do I want to be? What purpose do I want to have? How do I want to show up in my relationships?
Yeah.
We don't give ourselves time for that anymore. It's not that we don't have time, we don't give ourselves time. We allocate our time to other things that don't matter.
Well, talking about privilege, I actually
Mm-hmm.
think the two of us are very privileged to have grown up in Gen X,
Mm-hmm.
because I remember the endless amount of times of being bored and just hanging out. Hanging out had no plan, right? You weren't
No,
watching something.
no,
Maybe you planned to listen to the new Smashing Pumpkins CD. Maybe if anybody had
maybe.
any money to buy it, you were just literally doing nothing with
I
people
rem-
around you.
so I remember the funnest thing to do was get in the car and throw in some music, pick up a few friends, and we drive around
Yeah,
listening to music. And that's it. And we would make friends along the way, or we'd go to the lake, or go to a park, or go to the mall. It was like, what do you want to do today? I don't know. Come pick me up. Okay. What do you want to do? I don't know. Let's just drive around. And and that was like some of the best memories I have is driving around listening to music. Like with
the other part.
no purpose, like no goal. We're so too goal focused. It's like if it doesn't serve, what am I going to get out of it? I'm not doing it. It's like, how about just experiences? You are right. We had a really big privilege. We did some crazy shit, and we have no evidence of it. No
I know.
pictures, no
I'm
photos,
so
and
grateful for that
so
every
grateful for
day.
that every day that no one was taking photos of our experiences. Now we have to story tell. And that brings up that nostalgic feeling. And this is the other thing we're missing, and I think that we're not well, is that we've missed storytelling. It's You saw that on my stories. There's a reason why we call it stories, is because humans innately are storytellers, and we build connection in storytelling.
I also, to building resilience, right? Part of
Yes.
overcoming the bad thing, part of overcoming the trauma is creating meaning from the
Yes.
story. And if I just show you a picture of,
That doesn't do
oh, I
anything.
jumped off this cliff. Here's me jumping off the cliff. There is no story, there's no value, there's no lesson learned, there's nothing that you gain that I have personally. I had the whole experience. And
Right.
yet I haven't made any meaning from it. It's why we keep forgetting them. Like I went through my pictures recently and I was like, I did that. Completely forgotten all these events
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't make any meaning from any of them. Right. I've
Yeah.
actually stopped doing that very often
Mm-hmm.
because I want to create a story from it. I want to create meaning. I want to remember my life. I don't want to just have it be on Instagram and be like, oh, yeah, I did do that. Huh. Okay. And that's just really hard to show people if they're it the dopamine is hit is real. Like part of the reason
Mm-hmm.
we call these a challenge is because it's hard. Like I don't want to minimize how hard it
I
is to take
agree.
off all the apps or to move them and turn off your notifications. Or I get people are like tell me they have no time and I'm like, well, how much TV do you watch a week? I
Right.
mean, I watch it a significant amount. I'm not bashing TV watching.
Right.
It's fabulous. But before you tell me you have no time, let's see what it's like not to watch TV for 7 days straight. Because going back to Gen X, we didn't have TiVo, we didn't have Netflix. If you didn't show up at 8 o'clock on Thursday to watch whatever you were watching, you
You
just
missed
missed
it.
it. And guess what? I wanted to go hang out with my friends more than I wanted to watch this TV show. So I just
Mm-hmm.
missed it, you know? And all of us, I think, have missed the fact that actually we do have more time than we think if we
Mm-hmm.
use it and we don't just check out. And I'm not blaming people for checking out. There's a
No,
lot to check
not
out from.
no blames. Like no blame. It's like you have like slowing down your life in a way of like just creating more space for downtime and rest and restoration and thinking and reflecting and do all things is like being a rebel in our current culture because busyness is like a badge of honor. I don't know if you notice this, but even my friend group, like, how's it going? Oh my God, I'm so busy. And I would find myself saying the same thing. I'm like, I'm going to stop because this is not a competition, a busy. And I don't really want to do that. It's like, there needs to be more depth in how I've been doing it. So I've been good, or this has been a challenging week, or this has been a really difficult season. And that's very different than saying, oh, I've been so busy. It's like, doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah. When I thought about creating this channel, I thought long and hard about what I wanted it to be because it part of it's just personal preference. I hate TikTok. I hate 30-second videos. Like I'm just not interested. So I didn't want to contribute things that I'm not interested in. And I also wanted to create something that allowed people to slow down a little bit. You know, I think Joe Rogan is a great example in the fact that, you know, he gets a lot of love and a lot of hate for very valid reasons, but he does something really amazing on his show. He slows down, which gives him permission to be curious about the person he's with. Now, I don't have 3 hours to be listening, and I don't always like all of his guests or his points of view,
Mm-hmm.
but he brings that. And so I wanted to bring something where people had a chance to talk about the wider world. You said, oh,
Right.
it's a big question. I'm like, yeah, because we should be asking big questions. And I wanted to create enough room so you weren't scared to say the entire picture of what it is you wanted to say. You didn't have to
Right.
come up with a soundbite.
Right.
Maybe that means a lot of people don't watch this because I know a lot of people prefer their TikTok and the
Sure.
reels and the shorts and all that good stuff. But for me, I wanted to put out into the world something that helped you slow down.
Right. I mean, it's the same reason why I created my podcast, right? Was like sharing information that therapists have or people in the world have that have this access to research and context to provide accurate information that has the context and meaning to it with actionable things that you can do. There are lots of things we can do in our everyday life to have a better life or have better relationships or be a more connected parent, a more connected spouse, a more connected friend. There are lots of challenges that we're all going through as humans. We all go through very similar challenges and we think it's just us. And that's the problem with isolation is we think, oh, it's just me. Whereas when we were more connected, we understood like, oh, maybe it's like my mom just died. Oh, and I also know that my neighbor 3 doors down also lost her mom recently. And I can build a connection. We don't know this anymore. We don't know our neighbors. We don't talk to people. We feel really isolated. And I think that's why therapy has become so popular is because we're so disconnected. And I've always wanted to like work myself out of a job, right? And it's like I'm never going to be out of a job, unfortunately, because we're so isolated. And so I commend you for starting this channel because I think it's important. And it's very similar reasons why I started a podcast is for that reason is to kind of share information and normalize these things that we think they're actually just individual problems because they're not.
Well, one of the ways I start to know that somebody's ready to graduate from therapy, because I am not a believer in sticking you in therapy for the rest of your life.
Right.
Like, come on, go out and have an adventure, come back with new problems. Is
Right.
always my philosophy.
100%.
But one of the signals for me is, oh, hey, yeah, I didn't need to talk to you. I didn't need to schedule that emergency session because I just called my best friend. I'm like, yes, you used your research.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, no, you know, you've been so proud of me, Liz. And
Right.
I didn't wait to talk to you. I had the
Right.
conversation with my wife. I had the
Right.
conversation with my husband. I shared this with my child, and I'm like, okay, yeah, now we're on our way to get, because yes, there's parts that only a therapist can give you, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but there's so much that a therapist is doing right now that has more to do because you're not talking to the people around you.
I
And
totally
so a
agree.
big part, I think, of our job is getting you to connect and actually talk to the
To
people
other
in your
people,
community.
to
Yes,
build relationships, to build connection.
exactly. And once you have that community, you don't need us.
No,
We're,
and that's great. I love
yeah.
it. I love to not be needed.
Yes, and it sounds crazy. We're putting ourselves out of a job. But the reality is, bad things are always going to happen.
All the time.
And sometimes you do need that professional who can
Yeah.
provide that professional piece of help, right? Like when someone is truly traumatized and truly is suffering from panic attacks, you do need that support.
Or just like having someone outside of the situation. I think that's really valuable. I hear this a lot in grief and loss, right? And when people say like, I don't want to talk to so and so about it because they're also grieving. And I don't want to add to other people in my life. I need someone who's outside of the situation to help walk me through this process because we're all in the same space, right? And I think there's a lot of value of having someone who's outside of your family, outside of your relationship, outside of things, because we do see things differently. Because that's the privilege of therapy is like, I have an outsider's perspective. So I see the picture a little bit different, or see areas of the picture that maybe you're not seeing right now, but it's right there in front of you. And maybe it can help you get to that space. And there's so much value in that. It's what I believe or imagine what spirituality has done for so many thousands of years through human history is having an outsider be a support person. But we don't have that as much anymore. And I think that's just what therapy has become. There's a lot more to it for sure. There's a lot of research and approaches and everything that we do around that. But in some ways, it's just this connecting point of an outsider of the trauma that can help shed some light maybe on the path that the person can take.
We brought this up a little bit earlier, but I do think one of the places where therapy actually adds a lot of value, right? Because we've talked a lot about how not everybody needs it. So this is the
Right.
piece of like where it is needed.
Right.
We in losing the church and losing spirituality, sometimes you need a space to talk about the dark stuff, about death. I have actually
Yeah.
been it's not surprising when you think about the pandemic and how many people die. But yes, in the past 2 years, a consistent theme in my practice has been how many people have needed to confront mortality, their own death, their parents' death,
Mhm.
aging, dementia. I think the entire world right now, or the entire
Yeah.
country right now, is wrestling like with what does
Mhm.
aging mean and what should we do about that? And there's not a lot of spaces to have
No.
that conversation. A lot of people don't want to talk about death, don't want to admit this as a possibility. And I've never met a therapist who's scared to talk about death,
Right.
right? And to talk about death, to talk about sex, to talk about birth,
Hmm.
to talk about the really big existential, scary things in the world. And to your point about the outsiders, sometimes that can be too big to bring up to the people around you. Or
Hmm.
you can do it once or twice, but you need to be having a lot of those conversations.
Yeah.
And therapy can give you that space to start having some of those
Yeah.
deeper, darker conversations with somebody you don't have to take care of. Like
Right.
it's our job to take care of you.
Right.
And I do think that's a piece that we're providing right now
Or just
is a
you just
space for
wrestling.
darkness.
I totally agree. Space for darkness, in the space to wrestle with things that are uncomfortable even say, which is rooted in shame. Like
Yeah.
for a mom to come to therapy and say, I don't like being a mom.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's not socially accepted in people's lives. We don't do it in our culture. We shame a lot of there's a lot of hype around like having to love motherhood. And so it's just one example of a topic that is really hard for women to go, I don't know who to talk to about this. No one ever told me that maybe I wouldn't love being a mom. But it's hard and it's robbing things from me and I'm struggling and this is a really hard phase and I have no one to talk to about it. There's so many things that we go through that we keep in our heads and we wrestle with it by ourselves. And therapy is a space to kind of put it out there and say, I'm wrestling with this thing. I'm wrestling with this shame, this embarrassment, this guilt, that I don't really know what to do with it besides it's like running around in my head the whole time. And to have someone accept that without judgment, to say, actually, this is really normal. I hear that all the time. And I think there's the space for that, those pieces of darkness or those pieces of struggle that maybe we just don't have safety. And most of us don't have safety to bring up things that are shameful in a space with somebody else who's gonna be able to hold it and not try to fix it.
Yeah.
or tell you how you feel is wrong, or that's just silly. What do you mean you don't love being a mom? Of course you do. That's usually the answer, right?
Yeah. Well, bring the shame piece in. I think about how many people show up in my office and they're like, you're the one person who knows
Mm-hmm.
every piece. So this friend might
Right,
know this piece, this friend might know
right,
this piece, but I don't want to tell my family I got fired. And I don't
right,
want to tell my friends that I started a YouTube channel. And I don't want to
right,
tell my girlfriend that actually like I watch porn and I don't want to
right,
do all this. So like Liz, you're the only person who knows
right,
all these different pieces so we can connect all the dots because I'm too ashamed to show up as
right,
myself in all these
right,
places. And so I refer to it as a mask. And I always say like in therapy, that's the one place you can take all the masks down.
right,
You just get to show up as yourself,
right. And
you
that's so
know?
powerful
Yeah.
and life
Well,
changing.
I hope so anyway. I hope that's the role we're playing in the world. I hope we're in there. We've talked a lot. We've gone a full circle. I hope we've talked about a few exciting things. So let's end on a positive note.
Sure.
What are you excited about for yourself, your business, your practice, bringing to your community for the rest of this year?
Oh, it's a good question. I have a podcast I started last year and it's been growing. I'm super excited about it. Mental Makeover Radio on podcasting and on YouTube. Really, the feedback's been great, and I just love being able to give back. So I'm really excited about that. My practice is continuously to grow, which is really great, and having a really amazing team of people really makes a difference. So something to keep in mind about environment in which you work in can make a really big difference in your life. And I think just excited about things to come. Maybe writing a book, doing retreats. I'm contemplating taking some of my therapy knowledge of the last 20 years and turning that into a journal or a couple of journals with prompts and things like that. So I'm just excited about different ventures to come.
Well, that sounds exciting. I think sometimes as therapists, we can get in our head and be like, oh, there's already so much information out there, to your
Mm,
point, right? Like, what can we add? But I think there's always a book that can talk to a slightly different group or a
totally agree.
podcast or a journal, etc. All
Mm,
right, well, Cecilia, you're going to send me all that information. I'm going to put it in the show notes and get this out to
nice.
everybody. And I really look forward to continuing our conversations and
I
hopefully I
just
can have
love
you
it.
back
Thanks for
soon.
having me on.
You're welcome. All right, bye.